do we get behind these maybe high school kids who, you know, in middle school they might have been able to go to some of these programs and now they're not in high school and they were taught some of these things, but they're kind of slipping through the cracks now. How do we go about handling that kind of situation?
I think that we have to develop a comprehensive, holistic youth development system for our young people. From the womb, the cradle, preschool, kindergarten, elementary, middle school, high school, even in the young adulthood. And we have a tendency to build in all the supports at the earlier ages when they need more supervision, when they need transportation, when someone else has to organize the activities for them. And that's when you see the most adults that are engaged in youth football, youth basketball, soccer, those type of activities. As the young people get older, the adults sort of start to dissipate and to move away, and the youth end up having more unsupervised time and unsupervised activities. And I think that we have to develop more things where there's engagement from adults with these young people, teens, and young adults, and make those activities family events as well. I often say to people, think about what happens in our society. So at the early levels, preschool and elementary, everybody participates, right? You get a trophy just for participating. We celebrate everybody being involved, right? So when children move into middle school, we retire the vast majority of young people that played sports as children. We retire them because once they go into a middle school, only a select few athletes get to participate, a select few cheerleaders. And what I'm suggesting, we need to have a robust, well-funded youth recreation activities for kids at the middle school level and into the high school level, even those who do not participate on the school athletic or extracurricular teams. And I don't think we realize that that's what happens. So kids now have less structured, less supervised activity. They're not celebrated the way they were celebrated when they were younger. And I think kids need to be celebrated, and younger need to be celebrated all the way through into adulthood. And I think that we can do that. We just have to have the vision to do it, the will to do it, and work at making it happen.
Yeah, I totally agree with you. And now, kind of just talking about what you've seen on the West Side. You said you had your first, what happened in 1994? That was the first time that you, not buried, but...
Yeah, the 1994 was the year that the violence hit me pretty closely. I've been in the ministry ever since 1982 officially. And I've been ministering outside of Charleston, right? A little small community down in Boone County, in Madison, West Virginia. So I was down there quite a bit. I was traveling with my employment at the time. So I was not as involved and as engaged in Charleston. And then then I came back to pastor the Grace Bible Church in 1994. And I believe that that was the first year that a young man was murdered in a house on Grand Street. My organization now owns, my little nonprofit. And he was a good friend of mine's nephew. And that was the first time that I was really close to someone that had a close relative that was murdered in a violent situation, and that I was responsible for officiating and for eulogizing this young man. And it was a heart-wrenching experience. I did not know that that would become something that would be common for me to have to do for the next maybe 2 decades. And over this period of time, I've probably officiated more funerals for young teenagers and young adults than I've done weddings for young people. And that's how bad it got at one point. When you move into the 90s, when the crack epidemic really was at its peak on the West Side, into 2000s, it was just unbelievable, the number of violent crimes that were committed and the number of murders. If memory serves me correctly, I believe it was in 2004 that I think there were 13 murders in Kanawha County. I think that 11 of them was on the west side of Charleston. And a number of them we hosted here at this church. And some of them were horrific beyond measure in terms of what happened. 2 young people were executed on, I think, near Hunt Avenue and 2nd Avenue. And the young lady was a good friend of mine's daughter. There was a rash of shootings where young people that had been in a program that my organization had run, Hope Community Development Corporation, and several of those young men were murdered. And 2004 and 2005, it was a very, very difficult time. Now think about the timeline. 2004, 2005, we're talking 16 to 17 years ago. So that means that any young person who was 5 years of age, right, that's in their early 20s now, they were 5. And I think there was a trauma that happened in this community during that period of time, that we were traumatized, both youth, teens, and adults. And the abnormal became far too normal, of young people being murdered, of parents having to bury their children. And I think it had an effect on us in ways that we still don't fully understand. And at the time, I was trying to suggest, but I couldn't get a hearing, that we have a public health and we have a mental health problem over here that needs the help of professionals. But during that very, very aggressive period of the war on drugs, the primary response from local government, county government, and the federal government was more police presence, joint task force, more aggressive policing of drugs. And I think they may be doing the best they can, but it traumatized people, kicking people's doors in, law enforcement coming in with assault rifles and tearing up people's properties looking for would-be drug dealers. This has been all a part of what has happened. The west side of Charleston was ground zero, and certainly Kanawha County and much of southern West Virginia, for the war on drugs in the 80s, the 90s, and the 2000s. You go back and you check the record, the number of arrests, the number of prosecutions, the number of people that got incarcerated. And so this has had an effect on the psyche of this community, and I don't think we've ever really had that type of conversation. We've not had mental health people, we've not had counselors come in and talk about what does this type of violence do inside of a community, and how does it shape young people's view of their community, their view of themselves. For years, I denied the effect that it had on me. I denied it. I tried to act like it wasn't as bad as it really was. But now, as I look back on it, there was young one year, I eulogized a friend of mine that I grew up with from that pulpit. I looked out at his son, who was a teenager, who had had some problems with the juvenile justice system. And I made an appeal to him that you have an opportunity to break this cycle of violence. This young man had a young son himself, and I was hoping I could reach him. It wasn't 2 years later that I eulogized him from the same pulpit, in the same church. And these are some of the things that's happened. I saw one of the best athletes I think that we ever produced. And he was in the mentoring program that we had. And he got off track just a bit, but I was hopeful that he was going to get back on track. And but he ended up being shot and murdered here on the west side of Charleston. Such promise and such potential that was lost. I remember the day that I was going to my mother-in-law's. It was the day, I think, after the 4th of July, for a picnic after the picnic. And I crossed the railroad tracks there at Patrick Street, and I heard all these sirens and police cars. I said, let me get out of the way. I don't want to get blocked and not be able to get to my destination. By the time I get there, with a few minutes later, I get a telephone call, and to be informed that a friend of mine's daughter had been murdered at the Taco Bell, or had been shot, and that they thought that she was dead. It was devastating, absolutely devastating to this community for that to happen. And and I knew the perpetrator. Young man had been in a GED program, had had some challenges, but you know, you always are hopeful. Young people find their way. As a matter of fact, that a year or so earlier, prior to that, he and a good friend of his had been involved in a shooting on the west side of Charleston, where they had both been shot. He had been shot in the chest, his friend had been shot in the head. And we were called to the hospital. And we didn't think that either of them would live. And I went to meet with them, pray with the family, and pray for them, and it didn't look good for either one of them. And they both survived that. I'll never forget the last time that I saw that young man. He was down at Shawnee Park, and they had a basketball league there, and he and a couple of his friends together. And I stopped him, and I called him by name, and I said, the Lord has given you a second chance. What are you going to do with it? And he said, oh, Reverend Watts, I'm going to get it together. It's the last conversation we had before the situation happened at the Taco Bell. These things affect you, and you don't realize how much they've affected you. And as someone who's been in the ministry, you know, for over 37 years, and that I often say to good friends of mine, I'm like the gentleman in the farmer's insurance commercial. I know a thing or two because I've seen a thing or two. And I think watching mothers grieve their children, watching siblings grieve their children or their siblings that has been, life has just been ripped away from them like that, it affects them, and probably for years to come in ways that they don't realize. So I guess what I'm saying, I think that there's been so much trauma in this community, but there seldom was a real compassionate response to the trauma of the community. It's as if the community was blamed for the trauma. It's at West Side. There's some wild, crazy people on the west side of Charleston. So the survivors are blamed for incidents, crimes that's been committed against the community. And everybody's grieving, you know. You saw one of the videos probably, and the response that a family member had to me, right? And someone I know, and I understand they were just hurting. They were hurting, and maybe I should have been more compassionate. I don't know. I did what I thought was appropriate to do at the time. But everybody's hurting. And it's as if the whole community was blamed for the things that's happened over here. And these children are not responsible for any of the conditions in this community. Their only sin, that they were conceived and born to parents that lived here. And their birthright was to be born in this neighborhood, in this community. And they really deserve better. And that's what I've tried to say over the years, right? That they really deserve better than what we as adults, a better environment, a more wholesome environment, a healthier environment to be born and to be raised in. But with all that, I'm still hopeful. I really am. I'm still hopeful. And I guess maybe I'm naive in some regards, but my faith causes me to be hopeful. I don't think it takes God long to do something big and do something significant. And I think that I'm hopeful about a generation of young people, because the last tragic death of KJ Taylor was as close to me as it could be without being a member of my family, because my grandson, Exane, and he'd been friends since the 2nd grade. And I mean, they were real tight, went on vacations together, played sports together, went to middle school together from this neighborhood. They went together over to Horace Mann and that type of thing. And to watch my grandson, who was an only child, to grieve the closest thing to a sibling that he had, and see the impact it's had on him and on his friends. And I think it's been an impact that they want to do better. They want to do something. They want to be a part of something that's changed the trajectory of the lives of young people and the community. And I think that they will, because they are a good group of young people. You know, they really are. They just want to have fun. They just want to do stuff and be positive. And so when I look at my grandson and look at some of his friends and the outpouring of love and support for KJ's family and the way he was honored in his homegoing ceremony and the wonderful eulogy by Reverend Biddle, it gave me a sense of hope that a seed is planted in the ground and it dies, but its death brings forth a plant, a harvest. And I'm just hopeful that maybe this time it will be different. You know, you're always hopeful that we don't just go back to the way things were, and we keep trying to move things and move the needle forward. And I'm just hopefully and cautiously optimistic to believe that maybe this time it's going to be different.
I hope so too, because you do look, there's so many young people who have died over here, and you know, you look at it and maybe things change for a little bit and then they go back. Do you think that maybe this time it could be different, and you know, that good group of guys can continue to, you know, show positivity around here and get things to change, or you know, do you think history is going to repeat itself?
I think that we're going to still see violence. I think we're going to still see people shot and people still going to be murdered. That's not the way I really measure whether or not we're making progress. You know, I look at our adults engaging with young people, adults really fighting to create opportunities, you know, for the young people to do positive things. Are the young people engaging in doing positive things? Are young people excited about going to school? Are they excited about learning? Are young people making plans that when I grow up, I want to do this, I want to do that? I measure it by what I call the optimism quotient, right? The hope factor, right? And the twinkle back in kids' eye again, because we've been in this cycle for a long time, and unfortunately, there are a lot of individuals, basically, that have made some missteps, have taken some wrong turns, and have gotten themselves involved in a lifestyle that may culminate in them being the victim of or perpetrators of a violent crime. That's just the reality. And I don't know if there's any way short of, and this is my ultimate hope and my ultimate dream, which only a few might hold, of a major spiritual revival, right? Where people really have a spiritual transformation. They have a spiritual epiphany. I was created by a holy God that doesn't make mistakes, and there's meaning and there's purpose and there's significance in my life, and I want to reach my full potential, and I want to be a blessing and not cause pain. I'm always hopeful that will happen in the people that it needs to happen with, right? I shared with my church a couple of weeks ago, is that, you know, we're often not as far removed from someone who commit an act of violence or someone that might be a victim. So if all of us are trying to be as sensitive as we can and to influence people in the right way, we don't know what our influence can keep from happening, right? And so I don't ever want us to feel like we're just victims, right? It's a fait accompli, it's going to happen, nothing we can do about it. No, there are things that we can do, and every day our actions and our decisions really matter, they really count. Our optimism, our hopefulness, the encouragement that we offer to people, it really matters. And someone is close enough to that person that may be close to committing an act of violence, that they may be able to influence them not to do it. And I think that's the hopefulness that we have to have, that what we do matter.